On the corner of a large lot in Vancouver's busy West End stands a small wooden house. Known as the RoeddeHouse, it stands, as it has stood for over 100 years, as a reminder of different times, as part of our heritage from the days when Vancouver was young. The RoeddeHouse was built in 1892 when the city of Vancouver was barely 30 years old. 30 years before this house was built, what we know as the city of Vancouver consisted of the scattered settlements of its original inhabitants, the First Nations people, and vast areas of virgin forest. Even in 1892, when construction on the house was started, Vancouver was very different than it is today. Today there are nearly 500,000 people living in Vancouver, and the West End is one of the city's most densely populated areas. In 1890, Vancouver had only 15,000 inhabitants, and the West End, where the RoeddeHouse is situated, was just becoming a popular place for well-to-do white businessmen and their families to live. Many of the major roads that we are familiar with today were in place then, but they looked very different. Downtown Granville Street had considerably fewer stores. And farther along Granville Street, in what is now Kerrisdale, there were no stores at all. Even though much of the city looked very different then, there were similarities too. English Bay, where lifeguard Joe Fortes resided, was even then a popular recreational area. Like today, these were years of rapid growth for the small city of Vancouver. Public transportation was a major issue. The downtown area was already heavily built up, and a steady stream of immigrants from all over the world was coming to Vancouver, building homes and making new lives for themselves and their families. The Roeddes were one such family. Originally from Europe, Gustav and Matilda had met and started a family in the United States before coming to Vancouver, where they would found the city's first bookbinding business.
Vancouver was a very young city when grandfather arrived. It didn't have a printer or bookbinder to print menus for restaurants or books that people would read, and grandfather brought these talents and set up the first firm.
The firm that Gustav would set up would become well known for the quality of work it produced. Like many immigrants, Gustav was a highly trained professional. He was both a skilled craftsman and a talented artisan. The skills and talents he brought with him to his new country would be valuable assets to the community of Vancouver.
When I visit the house and look at the things that my great-grandfather made and recognize his talents, I really think of the richness that immigrants bring. They bring talents, they bring skills, they are artists, and they do that today as they did it 100 years ago when great-grandfather came to Vancouver.
The house that Gustav and Matilda Roedde would build was very much a reflection of the times in which it was built and the people that it was built for. Because of its importance as a reflection of those times, the house underwent a complete restoration in the 1980s, and the RoeddeHouse Society was formed to preserve and show the house as part of Vancouver's heritage. The architect, or the person who designed the house, was Francis Rattenbury, who later went on to design many of the province's most famous buildings. The RoeddeHouse was built in the Queen Anne style. Elements of this style include a complex roofline, dormer windows, bay windows, and a large veranda or porch. Rattenbury also included many things that reflected his own tastes, the city around the house, and the needs of the family who would live there. The turret, for example, was built so that Matilda Roedde, who was from Heligoland, which is a small island off the coast of Denmark, could see the ocean whenever she wished. The extensive use of wood, both inside and outside the house as a major building material, reflects the fact that Vancouver was surrounded by forests. Top-quality lumber was both cheap and available. The fine detailing throughout was affordable in an era when nearly everything was done by hand. The state of the house now is very nearly as it was at the turn of the century when the Roedies lived in it. Looking around the house is the closest we can come to seeing how people then lived. Just as the city around the house was both similar and yet very different from the city we live in now, so too is the house both similar and yet very different from houses that we live in today. These similarities and differences can give us important clues to the lives of the people who lived there and how those lives were both like and unlike our own. Because people did live here, the objects in the house aren't just decorations or antiques. They're things that people used all the time in making their day-to-day lives. The bed was slept in. The piano was played. The table was eaten at.
Hi.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Hi, dear. How are you? Good. That's nice. Hi.
The RoeddeHouse and the times it represents are part of the heritage of all people of Vancouver. For surviving members of the Roedde family, though, the house is also part of their personal heritage. It has
Yes,
special
we're just
meaning.
going to meet you in the garden.